So as ever, nice, easy, gentle start. Give yourself a few moments to let your thoughts quieten and just become a little bit more aware of the posture. So feet below your hips. Weight a little bit forwards in your feet and your hips just dropping back, but soft in your knees. That's really quite a small movement, but you will feel it strong in your legs. And there's sort of easygoing feel, free feeling quality in your hips, loose quality, and then in your shoulders. A couple of slow, gentle breaths just to check in with your breathing. Remember, with your breathing, you are trying to get a sense of breathing down into your belly, as though your lungs were down here in your belly. And as I've said to some of you before, really the best way to begin to build that is from a laying or seated position, because standing, we do have this habit of pulling the belly in, which we don't want to do. We want to get away from that and feel the support from legs and back. So the front of the body isn't straining to hold you upright. Good muscle tone, but not stiff. But until you manage to develop that, we're probably using these muscles around the lower abdomen to help support our weight. And if they're doing that, it's less likely they're going to be able to get involved in the breathing. But nevertheless, if you have the idea of breathing from deeper down, you should, after a while, feel that your posture is beginning to help that. You should never force your breathing, but every now and then, there's nothing wrong with just taking a couple of slightly deeper breaths. What we sometimes refer to in Tai Chi as bellows breathing, because it's like, if that's the side of the body there, you expand in belly and lower back, and solar plexus, and then in the chest. And like a bellows, you sort of suck the air down into your lungs. You get more air into your lungs that way. And then raising your arms. Good. Let your hands drop down. Gently rolling your weight forwards and backwards. That thing about the breathing is a good example of what happens in the Tai Chi posture overall, which is we gradually change our posture to one that allows a great deal more space, certainly within the upper part of your body. And then that space benefits everything that happens in our body. It's like, you know, if you just had a big meal and somebody came up and put their arms around you and squeezed, you go, no, don't, I've just eaten, sort of thing. Because digestion needs a certain amount of space. Movement is part of almost every process we can think of in one way or another. And we need the space for that movement. That includes the idea of the energy flow. So with this one, for instance, have this feeling almost that your spine is almost like a plant in water. Water will support a plant, but it won't lock it. It's not like a pipe locked into concrete. So it kind of floats forwards and backwards, and That's an image that you might be able to extend to the whole of your skeleton. The skeleton supports your body, but it can move a little bit. And if it's only a very small amount of movement, obviously, but as it moves, then the rest of the body will move with it. Then letting your hands follow. And you want to feel that, you know, the big muscles of, say, your forearm, your upper arm, and again, your back, actually have a bit of space. You know, if I do something like this, the muscle contracts, the biceps contract, sorry, the triceps, no, the biceps. And that means that they're going to get thicker and shorter. And then they get longer and thinner. If they've been squeezed in, then as they start to get thicker, they'll sort of push against something else in the body. So you want to feel as though there's a little bit of space around the muscles, between the muscles and the bones, but that nice fluid movement. This is quite a good exercise to play with that idea because it's very simple. And one of the things you'll notice is, you know, here I'm fine, and I can still feel that fluidity in the body. If I go to here, suddenly I'm stiffening up all through my body, likewise going back. So you've only got to slip over the line very slightly before that tightening takes hold, and we want to become very sensitive to that. And we want to distinguish between a muscle that on the one hand isn't being used, which would be the muscle relaxed. And, you know, if you just relaxed all the muscles in your body, it just collapse, wouldn't it? That's one extreme. Another extreme is that your muscles are really tight and locked. But sort of somewhere kind of in between that is a state where the muscles are engaged, but they're not tight, they're not stiff. They've got this sort of supple, elastic quality. As though you could just, like with a balloon, you could push into a muscle and it would yield to it, and then it would pop back into shape when you took your finger away. And that's a quality that we want to try and feel ultimately all the way through the body, not just in muscle. So now, letting your weight come to rest and letting your hips drop back and changing. We don't want any one part of the body to feel that it's been trapped or blocked by another part of the body. So losing that line with the pull of gravity may cause that. Moving too much, trying to bigger movements can do that. Moving in the wrong way, and remember that one way or another, every movement that we make has some kind of link to our feet. It's not always obvious. With these ones, it is, because, you know, we're sinking down and pushing up. But these first few exercises should give you a chance to really appreciate the feeling of your body yielding to gravity. And in the case of this, we alternate between that and the opposite movement, which is the sort of pushing up from the legs, from the ground. Now, if you think about it, actually, although we're alternating between those two movements with this exercise, actually both happen at the same time. It's like if you push a ball down into water, you straight away feel the push back up. It just so happens with this and a few other exercises, we kind of choose which stream of movement to put our attention into. Then change into the wild goose. And then after this one, heart in the clouds. So we begin to feel a sense of flow within the body. People sometimes say to me, do I use music with these movements? And the simple answer is no, actually, for various reasons. But one very important reason is that the flow of the movement isn't something that comes from outside. If we were playing music and suddenly the music stopped and we were relying on the music to give us the flow, then the flow would stop. But because it's coming from inside, really coming from that sense of space within the body and an awareness of that, those sort of directions of movement, that will just carry on. Now change into dragon plucks the stars from the sky. So I'm not trying to imply that the flow of the movement is unimportant. It's not. It's a very important benefit that comes out of the principles. But it's not something we try to create. What we do is we create the environment within which it happens naturally. Hence the term cultivation. Like if you plant something in the ground, you weed it, you water it, and whatever. I don't know. I'm not really a gardener, so I don't really know. But you maintain the environment. The plant itself does the growing. So if you get your posture correct, and you can keep to the basic principles, the flow will just come through. One more time. And then pushing in 4 directions. When we turn, we may well find ourselves tightening up across our back and our shoulders. It's an indication that we're not really taking the turn from the center of the body. If we're doing that, then we have no need to twist the back up. Or it could be an indication that you start off turning from your hips and then turn too far in the upper body. So you get to about here, and then you think, well, I can go further than this. I'm sure you can, but you don't need to. And in doing so, you, once again, you may block that internal flow, that internal movement. One more round. And then changing. And then if it's comfortable for you, add the turn. And switch sides. And again, if it's comfortable, turn. Lovely. So go back to just this basic movement. When we do this, the body's upright and the flow is nice and smooth up and down. Pelvis is level. When we go into the next movement, which is going to be rowing a boat in the middle of the lake, it's quite difficult to sustain that flow. So we need to think about what we're doing here. And it's not, rowing a boat is not about leaning forwards. I know that's what it looks like, you know, and definitely the head and the shoulders go forward. But if you think about leaning forwards, you do this and you fall over. It's really about the alignment of the pelvis. And so here, my hips go back, my pelvis tilts, my head does go forwards, but my back is, you know, it's still quite loose. Whereas if I'm like this and I do this, it's all stiffened up. And it's, I've kept that feeling because the counter movement is the hips going back. And then they drop down. And then I push up. Your arm is following. And if your back is still remaining quite soft. That means your shoulders won't tighten up. Your shoulders don't tighten up. More chance that your arms will stay nice and flowing. Whereas if your back tightens up, the tension will go all the way into your shoulders and your arms. You'll lose the flow. Well, another problem could be going too far with the movement, of course. But initially, sort of think about how this movement is done. You're not getting top heavy. Your center of gravity is not going out there. In fact, with the two-way movement of your hips and your head going in, essentially almost, your head's going forwards, your hips are going back, and that allows your center of gravity to stay above your legs. If your center of gravity is above your legs, or sinking down straight into your legs, more particularly, then you shouldn't feel unbalanced. And so there should be no need to stiffen up in theory. In practice, that's obviously quite a difficult thing to do. One more time. Shifting from side to side. There is always a counterbalancing movement in Tai Chi. And in the end, whichever direction that starts off in, it ends up going down. So for instance, here, I'm moving from side to side. And that happens because, again, I'll exaggerate here, watch there, it's this movement. The leg expands, the foot pushes into the ground, and rather than letting it push me up, I just direct the movement across. So the countering movement, it might be if I was standing against the wall, there's also a sense, there's almost a little kind of push away from there. So if you imagine the wall there, as you start to push from this leg, it's like you could almost feel yourself pushing against the wall, and then you go across, and then you imagine the wall there. It's almost like the pressure builds up and you go across. We're going to go into bear play, so you just let your hips turn a little bit. And of course, we have here, one shoulder goes forward, one shoulder goes back. And then going into bear play, you come up slightly in the middle, and that helps to move your arm. I turn a little bit, so I'm turned away from the hand slightly, but there's this line, shoulder, elbow, hand, knee, foot, more or less in the same line. I mean, nobody's coming around and measuring that, but it's not out here or over there. So because your body's turning that direction, your hand is going in the other directions, and it's not a big movement, but there's an opening here, and then here. Then we're going to change to hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. So you go over to one side, sink down, and then turn out a little bit to draw your hand out, turn the hand palm up, and this time it's a more upward inflected movement. It's quite a strong push from the ball of the foot. That's why your heel will come off the floor, and that allows you to turn a little bit more without straining the body, because it releases this hip a little bit. Your hand comes up directly in front of your shoulder, not across the body. And again, it's not a huge turn. So if you're standing in a square room and you're standing in the middle of the room, you'll be looking towards each corner, not the sides. So you wouldn't be doing this for this particular exercise. It's a very dynamic exercise, this one. You know, the name suggests hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. When we do cow gazes at the moon, that changes. That doesn't have the same suggestion of a very dynamic movement, even though we're using the body in a very similar way. So you can go a little bit further. If you think about it, you know, if you're hitting the ball, you'd want the ball to be in front of you. If the ball came from behind, you wouldn't try and hit it like that, because you could easily hurt your spine. But now we can change to cow gazes at the moon, and we can get to that same position. And then, if it's appropriate, it's not a competition, remember. You get to here, you sink down more, you release more in your hips, and go down. So if you're doing that, if you're going a little bit further with cow gazes at the moon, if you're not hurt, if you don't feel it in your legs more strongly, so if your legs don't ache more, my advice would be don't go that far, because you're probably straining your back. But it's when we get the space by sinking down. I'm exaggerating, but look, you see, there. One more time. And then come back and stand. Now, turn one hand palm up. Push up towards the ceiling. Push the other hand down a little bit towards the floor. Elbows are still bent there. And then bring the hands together, let them slide past each other, almost touching. Stretching between heaven and earth. The arm that's going up rotates, so as much as possible, again, without twisting the arm, without straining your wrist. You want to feel that the palm of your hand faces right up towards the sky. And there should be a rotation all the way down through your shoulder, not just your wrist. So if I exaggerate, if you watch my elbow, my hand comes up, and then the whole arm turns round. And then when it comes back, it comes down again. This time, as you push out, move your weight across just a little bit. So here, my right hand is going up, my weight's going into the right foot. It's only a small movement, and what you don't want to do is something like this. You don't want to lean, twist up. You still want to feel, if you imagine the center line of your body, it's moving across towards a point, and it won't be there yet, where it's going straight down into your foot. And we can begin to build towards that. And as always with a movement like this, just take it to whatever point is appropriate for you. But here, if I raise my heel, I go across a little bit further. Just see how that feels. If you can feel yourself sort of doing something like this, leaning over or something, then this is probably as far as you'll want to go at the moment. If you're okay with this, you could just step in, and then you step out, turn the hands in. So your body stays upright, your pelvis stays level. Your supporting foot is really sinking into the ground. Knees soft, hips soft, pelvis hanging down. And with all of that, that might make it possible for you to just raise the foot. Plant it to the side as the hands come in, moving across. Nice and smooth. So another tricky one to do and to maintain the flow of the movement. So the flow of the movement, going back to that, can be a kind of indicator that you're doing okay in the exercise. Now the way to approach this is if you're losing the flow at some point, then don't do this. Go back a couple of stages and find out at which point you lose the flow and what's going wrong at that point. One more time, each side. Good. And then just shake it out. So what I mean is, you know, if you're getting here, it's like, oh God, I'm going to fall over. Then does it feel the same when you put your toes down? If it doesn't, then where it's going wrong is like maybe this somehow. Maybe you're kind of doing that. If it still doesn't flow when you keep the foot down, you take it back a stage further, and so on and so forth. It's a bit like if you were sort of like if you had a map and you were trying to get somewhere and weren't sure of the terrain or the place you were in. If you suddenly realized that, you know, kind of like you were lost, you'll try and backtrack to a point that you recognized, and then you'd work out where you actually were going wrong. It's the same kind of idea, really. You kind of break movements down, work out the process, but from first principles. And so the flow of the movement that we experience ideally would be in all the movements, because all the movements work from the same fundamental basis, and so all of the movements have the potential for that flow. So when we lose it, somewhere along the line where we're losing the basics. So it's not something that we aim to produce, but when it's there, it's a kind of indicator, if you like, that things are doing okay, and vice versa. So now have 1 foot forwards, transferring the weight. Another thing, again, staying with the idea of the flow of the movement, another thing that helps us to cultivate, to generate that flow and to maintain it is the imagery that we use. A lot, although not all of the imagery, actually carries a quality of flow with it. Wild goose, the idea of moving through water, for instance, wind blows the willows, so on and so forth. it's always fun being in the water, because you move differently in the water, and that's the kind of quality of movement that we're developing, and that's what you're programming your body through the use of imagery to work to. Raising your toes and your heel. This is another point where we may find ourselves losing the alignment and the space in the body, because there's often a temptation to do this. So now I'm already falling forwards. Whereas in fact, you keep the body upright, you do this, and then this. There's no need to tilt the body, just to raise toes and heel. In fact, a good way of approaching this is to really feel as though you're sinking down as toes and heels rise. Remember, there's always a counterbalancing movement. So think of a seesaw. One end goes down, the other end goes up. So for your heel to come up, your body goes down. Likewise for the toes to come up. And then stepping in. Remember, if you were doing this in water, your legs have got to move through the water as well. They've got to meet the resistance and flow through it. And then on the other side. In some ways, we can think of the leg that is moving as being a third arm. Because at that point, there's no weight in it. And so ideally, when our legs are moving, we will feel the same kind of quality of movement in them as when the arms are moving. You won't feel that in the supporting leg, because that's performing a different role. And then raising toes and heel. Step in. And then going forwards a little. Or backwards if that's where the space is. Change direction. And bring your feet down. Shake out. The idea of the legs flowing is quite an interesting one. One exercise you could try, and it's best to sort of support this out, is just to get the legs swinging like this. Now the problem here is my foot keeps hitting the ground, of course, and so I'm inclined to lean over. So a good way of doing this, let me just grab something. Good way of doing this is to get something to stand on, and if you've got sort of like a step in your garden or something like that, that would be ideal. But here, for instance, that probably isn't quite big enough for me actually. But no. Yeah, so I'm holding on to the wall, and I can just let my leg hang down. It's quite nice actually. And if you feel a bit tight in your hip or your lower back, this is quite good. I do actually need to be a little bit higher here, but it doesn't matter. You just let gravity pull your leg down, and then you just do this, and it swings. It's rather nice for the hip and the leg, quite energizing for the leg. Oops. But do hold on to something while you're doing it. Yeah, it's simple enough, isn't it? So when we go to take a step, we can get the same kind of feeling, because here the heel comes up, the toes come up, the foot comes in, and it's just a slight lift here. So when it swings through there, you can just about do it like that. Yeah, that's quite interesting. But to get the feeling originally, stand on something, and it's quite nice if you've got a big enough gap there, your foot can hang right down. So it's quite strange, because if you do one leg and forget to do the other, you'll find yourself walking like that, because one leg will actually feel longer. So it's a good little exercise for the legs in any case, and it gives you an idea of how you want the leg to feel, what the energy of the leg feels like when you go to take a step, or even when you do something like this. It's hard to do. It's hard to keep that, but once you've got an idea of what it is, it's going to come much more easily. So have your right foot forwards, mirror my movements, hands on your belly, and pigeon spreads its wings. Tai Chi is sometimes described as a moving massage or an internal massage. And again, that's another interesting image to try and sort of get that feeling really all the way through the organs of the upper body in particular, but around the joints, muscles, bones, all through the body. And remember, one of the main things that will loses those qualities is when we cease to move with the whole body. So when we just flap our arms around or something. And another, and I suppose quite related reason to that is also when we move too far, especially when we move too far in the upper body. Now change into fisherman castanet. and then pushing a wave. One more time. Sinking back, turning into wind blows the willows. And then stepping in and possibly raising your foot. Again, if you try and do the step in, or having stepped in, try and raise the foot, and you suddenly find that you're wobbling around too much. I'm not talking about the odd wobble, everybody gets those, but you simply, you're constantly doing that. Backtrack a little bit. Try and identify at which point did it go wrong. Remember, I'm not saying you necessarily have to try this now, but you want to feel you could just rest here. And occasionally you will find yourself being pulled over, but in general, can you stop at that point? It's quite tricky. And bring your feet down. There is an exercise, one of the standing exercises that we do, where we stand like this for a few minutes. So they're quite similar in a way. This movement here, I talked before about the knee coming up. We want to avoid this, because obviously as soon as I do that, I'm wobbling around. And to get that posture, your knee comes up and your hip rotates. Oop. Didn't quite make it that time. See how easy it is. What happened there was as I rotated my hip, my pelvis sort of did that. I mean, not that much. It takes very, very little to throw you off. Okay, have your left foot forwards. So going back to the first exercise we did, swaying in the river, we learned to be very, very sensitive to the boundaries of the movement. One of the old writings in Tai Chi says that not even a fly should be able to land on you without it causing a change. Something as light as a fly affects the equilibrium of the body. Now, cushion and castanet. I mean, in theory, with any of the movements that we do, you should be able to stop completely at any one point and still feel that quality of alignment, that quality of equilibrium. I think equilibrium is probably a more useful term than alignment, because although it can mean the same thing, it can mean a little bit more, because it somehow, for me anyway, seems to sort of suggest the engagement of the mind as much as anything else. Because there's no doubt, if you're trying to stand on one leg and raise up your arms and so on and so forth, you do need to be very focused. And then pushing a wave. And wind blows the willows. Stepping in. And a few years ago, I quite like this exercise. I do practice it. But a few years ago, I was on holiday in the Wye Valley in Gloucestershire. The place I was staying had this lovely kind of lawn going down to the river itself. A little kind of sheltered landing area. It was rather nice. I used to go down there and do Tai Chi in the morning. It was a lovely spot for it. But I found, the first time I went to do this, I was like, oh, I mean, I said, what's wrong with me? I really need to practice this a bit more, because it's really kind of like I'm all over the place. And I realized after a while what it is, because I was standing there, and if I do this, most of what's in front of me is fairly still. What was in front of me in the Wye Valley was moving water. And whether I wanted to or not, whether it was conscious or not, the water moving past gave me the impression of movement. And so my body was doing that to try and account for it. It's very vivid impression of the connection between mind and body, and indeed the importance of the eyes in all of this. So I have to be quite careful if I'm outside that there's not too many branches blowing around or birds singing or something like that if I practice that exercise. Now just rub your hands together and then tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. The other side. Your back. Around your hips. right on your belly, the upper part of your chest. Great. Thank you again, everybody. So let's do embrace tiger, return to mountain. Back to the parallel stance. Let your hips sink down. And then pushing up. And once again, we have this cycle of movement coming up from the ground and then back down. Two sides of the same coin, two sides of the same cycle of movement. Just allowing gravity itself to help you to get into that rooted, centered position. One more time. And stand. And shake out. Great. Thank you very much for coming along, everybody. Good to see people at the new time. Take care of yourselves. Have a good weekend.